The dust storm rolled across the New Mexico horizon like a wall of angry spirits, and Grace Murphy knew she had maybe 30 minutes before it swallowed the road completely. She pressed one hand against her swollen belly, feeling the twins kick in unison as if they sensed her fear, and urged the exhausted mare forward with her heels. The horse stumbled, caught itself, and Grace felt her heart drop because she recognized that particular stagger. The animal was done. They would not make it to Placitas before the storm hit, and out here in the open desert with no shelter and her belly 8 months round with 2 babies, she would die. The year was 1882, and women in her condition did not survive exposure in the high desert. She had left Santa Fe 3 days ago with enough food for the journey and hoped that her distant cousin in Placitas might take her in. That hope had sustained her through the first day when the wagon wheel broke. It had carried her through the second day when she abandoned the wagon and took only the mare and a saddle bag. Now, on the third day, with the storm bearing down and the horse failing beneath her, hope felt like a cruel joke. Grace slid from the saddle and grabbed the reins, leading the mare on foot. Her back ached with every step. Her feet had swollen so badly that her boots felt like Iron Maidens. But she walked because stopping meant dying, and she had 2 lives depending on her survival. The babies kicked again, harder this time, and she whispered to them, "I know, my darlings, I know you are scared. Your mama is going to figure this out." The wind picked up, throwing sand against her face with stinging force. Grace pulled her shawl over her nose and mouth, squinting against the assault. The mare balked, planting its feet and refusing to move. Grace tugged the reins, then tugged harder, but the animal would not budge. She wanted to cry. She wanted to scream. Instead, she dropped the reins and kept walking because what else could she do? That was when she saw the shape in the distance. At first, she thought it was a rock formation, but as she stumbled closer, she realized it was a man on horseback. He was riding toward her, not away from the storm, which meant he was either crazy or had seen her predicament. Grace raised her arm and waved, then stumbled and nearly fell. Her knees hit the hard, packed earth, and she caught herself with both hands, breathing hard. The rider reached her in seconds. She looked up and saw a man in his mid-20s with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of whiskey. He wore a dusty hat pulled low, a bandana around his neck, and the kind of weathered leather chaps that spoke of years in the saddle. He dismounted before his horse fully stopped and knelt beside her. "Can you stand?" His voice was rough but steady. "I think so." Grace let him help her up, his hand strong and calloused under her elbow. When she was upright, he did not let go immediately. His eyes went to her belly, then to her face, then back to her belly. "How far along are you?" 8 months, twins. He did not waste time asking questions. "My ranch is 10 minutes south if we ride hard. Can you manage?" "I will manage anything that gets me out of this storm." He whistled, and his horse lowered itself partway to the ground in a move that Grace had only seen in circus shows. The cowboy helped her climb onto the saddle, then swung up behind her. His arms came around her on either side, holding the reins, and he kicked the horse into a gallop. Grace felt the twins shift inside her, protesting the jostling ride, but she gritted her teeth and held on. The storm caught them when they were 5 minutes from shelter. One moment she could see the landscape, and the next, the world disappeared into brown chaos. The cowboy did not slow down. He leaned forward, sheltering her body with his, and kept the horse moving in a straight line as if he could navigate by instinct alone. Grace closed her eyes and prayed to a God she was no longer sure was listening. When the horse stopped, she opened her eyes and saw a low, adobe structure with a sloped roof and shuttered windows. The cowboy dismounted and pulled her down into his arms, carrying her like she weighed nothing despite her advanced pregnancy. He kicked open the door, carried her inside, and set her down on a bench just as the full force of the storm hit the building. Sand rattled against the shutters like hail. The wind screamed around the corners of the structure, searching for cracks. Grace sat there shaking, her whole body trembling with exhaustion and relief. The cowboy moved around the small space, lighting a lantern, closing the interior shutters over the windows, checking that everything was secure. When he was satisfied, he came back to her and crouched down so they were eye level. "Name is Owen Reeves. This is my place. You are safe here. Grace Murphy." She managed a weak smile. "Thank you for saving my life, our lives." Owen's eyes went to her belly again, and something complicated passed over his face. "When is the last time you ate?" "Yesterday morning." He stood and went to the wood stove in the corner, stirring up the coals and adding kindling. Within minutes, he had a fire going and a pot of water heating. Grace watched him move with efficient, economical motions, and she wondered what kind of man lived alone in the desert and knew how to ride straight through a dust storm to his own front door. "Where were you heading?" Owen asked as he set a tin cup of water in front of her. Grace drank deeply before answering. "Placitas. I have a cousin there who I hoped might take me in." "Margaret Simpson." Grace blinked in surprise. "You know her, small territory. Everyone knows everyone, at least by reputation." Owen pulled out a cloth sack and started assembling food on a plate. Dried beef, hard cheese, bread that was only slightly stale. "Margaret is a good woman, but she has 5 children of her own and a husband who drinks. I do not know that she has room for 2 more mouths to feed. Especially not twins." Grace felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. "I have nowhere else to go." Owen set the plate in front of her. "Eat first, we will talk after." She was too hungry to argue. Grace tore into the food with shaking hands, barely chewing before swallowing. Owen watched her for a moment, then turned away as if giving her privacy. The storm raged outside, but inside the thick adobe walls, the space felt safe and warm. Grace finished the food and drank another cup of water, and only then did she let herself truly look at the man who had saved her. Owen Reeves was not a large man, but he had the kind of wiry strength that came from hard physical labor. His hands were scarred and calloused. His face was all sharp angles and sun-weathered skin. But his eyes were kind, and when he looked at her, he did not look at her with judgment or pity. He looked at her like she was a problem to solve, and Grace got the sense that Owen Reeves was very good at solving problems. "The father?" Owen asked quietly. "Dead." Grace wrapped her arms around her belly. "He was a good man. We were going to be married, but he died in a mining accident before we could make it to the church. His family did not believe the babies were his. They threw me out." Owen's jaw tightened. "That is a hard thing. I thought I could make it on my own. I had some money saved. But everything went wrong." Grace felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She had not cried in 3 days, and she would not start now. "I should not be your problem. Once the storm passes, I will go to Placitas and figure something out." Owen was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What if I offered you another option?" Grace looked up at him, wary. "What kind of option?" "Stay here. Have the babies here. I have delivered calves and foals. I can help when the time comes, or I can ride to Placitas and bring back the midwife. After the babies are born, you can stay as long as you need. Work for your keep if you want to feel useful. Leave when you are ready." He paused. "No strings, no expectations, just a safe place for you and your children." Grace stared at him, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Men did not make offers like that without wanting something in return. "Why would you do that?" Owen looked away, and for the first time, Grace saw something vulnerable in his expression. "I grew up without a father. My mother did the best she could, but it was hard, brutal sometimes. I swore that if I ever had the chance to help a woman in her situation, I would do it." He met her eyes again. "You are carrying two lives that did not ask to be brought into this world. They deserve a chance, and so do you." Grace felt something crack open in her chest. She had been braced for cruelty, for exploitation, for the world to grind her down one more time. Instead, she had found kindness in the middle of a desert storm. "I do not know what to say. Say yes. Say you will stay, at least until the babies are born and you are strong enough to travel." "Yes." The word came out as barely more than a whisper. "Yes, I will stay. Thank you." Owen nodded once as if that settled the matter. "You can have the bed. I will sleep out here by the stove. I cannot take your bed. You can and you will. You are 8 months along with twins." "I am a cowboy used to sleeping on the ground. Do not argue with me on this, Grace Murphy." Despite everything, Grace found herself smiling. "I would not dream of it, Owen Reeves." The storm blew itself out by morning. Grace woke to sunlight streaming through the gaps in the shutters, and the sound of Owen moving around the main room. Her back ached, and her bladder was screaming, but for the first time in days, she felt rested. She pushed herself upright and waddled out of the small bedroom, one hand pressed to her lower back. Owen looked up from the stove, where he was frying bacon in a cast iron skillet. "There is an outhouse about 20 yards to the east. I will walk you out." Grace's cheeks flushed. "I can manage." "The rattlesnakes come out to sun themselves in the morning. You should not go alone." That settled the matter. Owen walked her to the outhouse and waited at a discreet distance while she took care of her needs. When she emerged, he offered his arm and she took it, grateful for the support. Her ankles had swollen overnight, and her whole body felt heavy and ungainly. Back inside, Owen served her bacon and eggs and more of the hard bread, toasted over the stove until it was soft enough to chew easily. Grace ate more slowly this time, savoring the food and the warmth and the simple miracle of being alive. "Tell me about this place," she said between bites. "How long have you lived here?" 5 years. "I saved up working cattle drives and bought the land from a man who wanted to move back east. It is not much, but it is mine." Owen poured coffee into 2 tin cups, then seemed to think better of it and poured milk for Grace instead. "I run about 50 head of cattle, sell them once a year in Santa Fe, make enough to get by and save a little. No wife. No." Owen's expression closed off slightly. "Never found the right woman, I suppose. Or maybe the right woman did not want a life out here in the middle of nowhere." Grace looked around the small adobe house. It was rough, certainly, but it was also clean and well-maintained. The floor was swept. The dishes were washed. Everything had its place. "It does not seem like nowhere to me. It seems like a home." Owen met her eyes across the rough wooden table and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. "I hope you can think of it that way, at least for a while." The days fell into a rhythm. Owen worked the ranch, riding out early to check on the cattle and mend fences and do the 1,000 tasks that kept a small operation running. Grace did what she could around the house, sweeping floors and washing dishes and preparing simple meals. She was slow and ungainly, but she was determined to earn her keep. Owen never made her feel like a burden. He came back each evening covered in dust and sweat, washed up at the pump outside, and sat down to whatever meal she had managed to put together. He complimented her cooking even when it was barely edible. He asked how she was feeling and actually listened to the answer. He treated her with a quiet respect that Grace had rarely experienced from men. At night, after Owen had banked the fire and unrolled his bedding by the stove, Grace lay in his bed and listened to him breathe. She wondered what kind of man gave up his bed for a stranger. What kind of man rode into a dust storm to save a woman he had never met? What kind of man offered safety without demanding payment? The twins kicked and rolled inside her, running out of room but still growing. Grace pressed her hands to her belly and whispered to them in the darkness. "You have a chance now, my darlings. We all have a chance." 3 weeks after Grace arrived, she woke in the night with a sharp pain radiating from her lower back. She lay still, breathing through it, telling herself it was nothing. The pain faded. She closed her eyes. 20 minutes later, it came again, stronger this time. Grace pushed herself upright and waddled to the doorway of the bedroom. Owen, he was on his feet in an instant, crossing the small space in 3 strides. "What is wrong? I think it might be time." Owen's face went pale in the moonlight streaming through the window. "You are only 8 months. The twins are coming whether we are ready or not." Grace gripped the door frame as another contraction hit, harder and longer than the first 2. She breathed through it, counting the seconds until it passed. Owen grabbed his hat and boots. "I am riding to Placida's to get the midwife. Do not do anything until I get back." "Owen, that is not how this works." "I know, but I am going anyway. Lock the door behind me. Do not open it for anyone but me or the midwife." He was already halfway out the door, moving with the focused urgency of a man on a mission. Grace locked the door as instructed and lowered herself onto the bench by the table. The contractions were coming every 15 minutes now, regular as clockwork. She had helped with births before, back when she lived in Santa Fe. She knew the signs. She knew what was coming. But knowing and experiencing were 2 very different things. The next 2 hours were the longest of Grace's life. She paced when she could, rested when she had to, and breathed through each contraction with grim determination. The babies were coming early, but not dangerously early. If the midwife arrived in time, everything would be fine. If she did not, Grace would have to manage on her own. She was boiling water when she heard horses outside. Owen's voice called out, "Grace, it is me. I have the midwife." Grace unlocked the door and nearly wept with relief. The midwife was a sturdy woman in her 50s with iron-gray hair and capable hands. She took one look at Grace and started issuing orders. Owen was banished to the yard. Water was heated. Blankets were gathered. The bedroom was transformed into a delivery room. How far apart are the contractions? The midwife's name was Ruth, and her voice was calm and matter-of-fact. 10 minutes, maybe less. Good. That gives us time. First babies always take longer, and you have 2 of them to deliver. Ruth helped Grace onto the bed and examined her with professional efficiency. "You are doing well. Strong and healthy. These babies are going to be just fine." Grace wanted to believe her. She gripped the bed frame as another contraction hit, this one so intense that she cried out. Ruth coached her through it, telling her when to breathe and when to push and when to rest. The world narrowed down to pain and effort, and the overwhelming need to bring her babies safely into the world. Outside, Owen paced the yard like a caged animal. He had delivered dozens of calves and foals, but somehow this was different. This mattered in a way that made his chest tight and his hands shake. He heard Grace cry out, and every instinct screamed at him to go to her, but he knew he would only be in the way. The sun was climbing toward noon when he heard the first thin wail. Owen's heart leaped. A few minutes later, a second cry joined the first, weaker but unmistakable. He sank down onto the bench outside the door and dropped his head into his hands. Ruth opened the door an hour later. "You can come in now." Owen stood on shaking legs and walked into the bedroom. Grace was propped up against pillows, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, her face pale with exhaustion. But she was smiling. In her arms, wrapped in clean blankets, were 2 tiny bundles. "Come meet them," Grace said softly. Owen crossed to the bed and looked down at the babies. They were impossibly small, red-faced and wrinkled, with downy dark hair and tiny fists. One was crying weakly. The other was nursing at Grace's breast with single-minded determination. "This is Samuel," Grace said, touching the nursing baby's head. "And this is Sarah." She nodded toward the crying one. "Would you like to hold her?" Owen had held newborn calves that weighed more than Sarah, but his hands had never felt clumsier. He took the baby with exaggerated care, cradling her against his chest. She was so light, so fragile, so utterly dependent. She stopped crying and blinked up at him with unfocused blue eyes. Something shifted in Owen's chest. It was not a small shift. It was tectonic, fundamental, the kind of change that redrew every map he had ever made of his life. He looked at this tiny person who was not his blood, not his responsibility, and thought, "I would die for you." "She likes you," Grace said. There was something in her voice, soft and wondering. Owen looked up and met Grace's eyes. What he saw there made his breath catch. She was looking at him like he was something precious, something miraculous, like he mattered. "You are carrying my future," Owen said. The words came out before he could stop them, raw and honest. "You and these babies. I know they are not mine by blood, but if you will let me, I would like to be part of their lives, part of your life." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "Owen, you have already done so much. I have not done nearly enough." Owen carefully handed Sarah back to Grace and knelt beside the bed so they were eye level. "I am not good with fancy words. I am just a cowboy trying to scratch out a living in the desert. But I can promise you this. If you stay, I will provide for you and these children. I will protect you. I will treat them as if they were my own. And maybe, if you can find it in your heart, you might let me court you properly. Not now, while you are recovering, but later, when you are strong again. I would like to see if what I feel for you might be something you could feel for me too." Grace reached out with her free hand and cupped Owen's cheek. Her palm was warm against his skin. "I already feel it," she whispered. "I have felt it for weeks, but I was afraid to hope. Afraid you were being kind out of obligation, not because you cared. I care." Owen turned his head and kissed her palm. "I care more than I have ever cared about anything in my life." Ruth cleared her throat from the doorway. "I am going to leave some instructions for the baby's care and then head back to Placida's. Grace needs rest, and those little ones need to eat every few hours. It is going to be a busy few weeks." Owen stood, feeling dazed and elated and terrified all at once. "Thank you, Ruth. I cannot tell you what it means that you came." Ruth smiled. "Just take care of them. That is all the thanks I need." The weeks that followed were the hardest and most beautiful of Grace's life. The twins were healthy but demanding, waking every 2 hours to nurse and fuss and need changing. Grace was exhausted, her body recovering from the ordeal of birth, her breasts sore and her emotions swinging wildly between joy and despair. Owen was a revelation. He took over all the household chores, cooking simple meals and washing dishes and keeping the place clean. When the babies cried at night, he was the one who changed their diapers and walked them around the small room, singing off key cowboy songs until they settled. He treated Samuel and Sarah with a tenderness that made Grace's heart ache. "You are a natural father," she said one evening as Owen rocked Sarah to sleep. "I am figuring it out as I go." Owen glanced at Grace and his expression was soft. "They make it easy. They are perfect. They are demanding and loud and they spit up on everything." "Perfect," Owen repeated firmly. Grace laughed, and it felt good to laugh. She had been so afraid for so long, but here in this small adobe house with this quiet cowboy and her 2 babies, she was beginning to believe in happy endings again. As the twins grew stronger, Grace regained her strength. She started taking over more of the household tasks, and Owen went back to working the ranch full-time. But every evening, he came home and spent hours with the babies, playing with them and talking to them as if they could understand every word. Samuel was serious and watchful, studying Owen's face with solemn concentration. Sarah was more outgoing, gurgling and cooing and reaching for anything that moved. On a warm evening in late summer, when the twins were 3 months old and thriving, Owen took Grace outside to watch the sunset. They sat on the bench together, shoulders touching, watching the sky turn gold and orange and purple. "I meant what I said," Owen began, "about courting you properly." Grace turned to look at him. "I remember. I want to marry you, Grace Murphy. I want to adopt Samuel and Sarah legally, give them my name. I want us to be a family in every way that matters." Owen took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle. "I am not rich. I will never be able to give you a fancy house in town or silk dresses or any of the things you might have dreamed of as a girl. But I can give you loyalty and hard work and a love that will last until the day I die. If that is enough, if I am enough, I would be honored to be your husband." Grace felt tears slide down her cheeks. "You are more than enough. You are everything I never knew I needed." Owen pulled a small object from his pocket. It was a ring, simple and made of silver, with a small turquoise stone set in the center. "I rode to Placitas last week and bought this from the trading post. It is not fancy, but it is real. It is beautiful." Grace held out her hand, and Owen slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. They were married a month later in Placitas, in the small church with Ruth and a few neighbors as witnesses. Grace wore a simple dress that one of the neighbor women had helped her sew, and Owen wore his best shirt and pants, freshly washed and pressed. Samuel and Sarah attended in a basket, sleeping through the vows with the obliviousness of infants. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Owen kissed Grace with such tenderness that she felt it down to her bones. This was real. This was forever. This was the family she had dreamed of and thought she would never have. They held a small celebration at the ranch, with neighbors bringing food and congratulations. The twins were passed from person to person, admired and cooed over. Grace stood in the doorway of the adobe house and watched Owen talking with one of the ranchers, Samuel in his arms, and felt a surge of love so strong it took her breath away. That night, after the guests had left and the twins were asleep in the cradle Owen had built with his own hands, Grace and Owen lay together in the bed for the first time as husband and wife. Owen was gentle and patient, mindful of Grace's body and what it had been through. They moved together slowly, learning each other, and when it was over, Grace rested her head on Owen's chest and listened to his heartbeat. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Owen replied, his arms tightening around her. "I loved you from the moment I saw you stumbling through that dust storm, refusing to give up. I loved you for your strength and your courage and the way you love those babies. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." Grace tilted her head up and kissed him. "We are going to have a good life together." "The best life," Owen agreed. The years that followed were not easy, but they were good. Owen's ranch prospered slowly but steadily. He expanded the herd and built a proper barn and added a room onto the house so the twins could have their own space as they grew. Grace proved to be a capable rancher's wife, helping with the cattle when extra hands were needed and managing the household with efficiency. Samuel and Sarah grew into lively, curious children. Samuel had Owen's quiet intensity and love of the land. He followed his father everywhere, learning to ride and rope and mend fences. Sarah had Grace's determination and warmth, and she appointed herself the social director of the ranch, befriending every neighbor within riding distance. When the twins were 3 years old, Grace discovered she was pregnant again. Owen was overjoyed, and Samuel and Sarah were fascinated by the idea of a new sibling. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and when Grace went into labor on a cool autumn evening, Owen was there beside her, holding her hand and coaching her through each contraction. Their son was born as the sun rose, a healthy baby with a powerful set of lungs. They named him James, and he completed their family in a way Grace had not realized was missing. Owen held his biological son with the same tenderness and pride he had shown Samuel and Sarah, and Grace loved him even more for it. The twins adored their baby brother. Samuel was protective, always making sure James was warm and comfortable. Sarah was affectionate, singing to him and bringing him treasures from around the ranch. Owen watched his growing family with quiet satisfaction, and Grace often caught him smiling to himself as he worked. 5 years after Grace stumbled out of the dust storm and into Owen's life, they were sitting on the porch one evening, watching the twins play with James in the yard. Sarah was teaching her little brother to walk, holding his hands and encouraging him with exaggerated praise. Samuel was building a tower out of smooth river stones for James to knock down. "You ever think about that day?" Grace asked. "The day you found me in the storm?" Owen was quiet for a moment. "Every day. It was the luckiest day of my life." "Mine too." Grace leaned against him, and Owen wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "I thought I was going to die out there. I thought the twins would die before they even had a chance to live. And then you appeared like an answer to a prayer I did not even know I had prayed." "I thought I was going to live and die alone in this desert," Owen admitted. "I thought that was my fate. And then I saw you, this woman who refused to quit even when everything was against her, and I knew my life was about to change. You said I was carrying your future. You were. You are." Owen turned and kissed the top of Grace's head. "Samuel and Sarah, James, you are all my future, and I am the luckiest man in New Mexico." Grace smiled and watched her children play in the golden light of the setting sun. The twins were healthy and strong, far removed from the fragile infants she had brought into the world in terror and pain. James was thriving, growing like a weed, full of laughter and mischief. And Owen, her steady, loving husband, was beside her as he had been from the beginning. The ranch continued to prosper. Owen hired a young man to help with the cattle, freeing up time for him to spend with his family. They took trips to Santa Fe once a year, staying in a hotel and letting the children marvel at the shops and crowds. Grace bought fabric for new dresses and books for the twins, who were learning to read. Owen bought tools and supplies, and always a small gift for Grace, some trinket that caught his eye and reminded him of her. On Samuel and Sarah's 8th birthday, Owen gathered the family in the living room after dinner. He had been quiet all day, and Grace had sensed he was working up to something. The children sat on the floor, James between his older siblings, all three looking up at their father with expectant faces. "I want to tell you a story," Owen began. "It is about the day your mother and I met." Samuel and Sarah had heard bits and pieces over the years, but never the full story. They listened with rapt attention as Owen described the dust storm, Grace's failing horse, the desperate ride to the ranch. He told them about the night the twins were born, how small and fragile they had been, how fiercely their mother had fought to bring them safely into the world. "I was not there when you took your first breath," Owen said, looking at Samuel and Sarah. "But I was there for your first day in this world and every day since. I love you both as if you were born to me, because in every way that matters, you were. You are my children and I am your father, and nothing will ever change that." Samuel and Sarah launched themselves at Owen, wrapping their arms around him. James, not wanting to be left out, climbed into the pile. Owen held all three of them, his eyes bright with tears, and Grace felt her own tears spill over. Later, after the children were asleep, Grace and Owen sat together in the quiet house. "That was a good thing you did," Grace said, telling them the story. "They deserve to know. They deserve to know that they were wanted and loved from the very beginning, even before I knew they existed." Owen took Grace's hand. "And they deserve to know that family is not just about blood. It is about choice and commitment and showing up every day." "You have shown up every day," Grace said, "for all of us." "It has been easy," Owen replied. "Loving you and those children has been the easiest thing I have ever done." When Samuel and Sarah were 10, Grace became pregnant again. She was older now, and this pregnancy was harder on her body. Owen was protective to the point of being overbearing, insisting that she rest and refusing to let her do any heavy work. Grace tolerated his fussing because she knew it came from love. Their daughter was born on a spring morning when the desert was in bloom. They named her Margaret, after Grace's cousin, who had unknowingly set this whole chain of events in motion. Margaret had Grace's dark hair and Owen's whiskey-colored eyes, and she was doted on by her older siblings from the moment she arrived. Samuel and Sarah were old enough to help with the baby, and they took their responsibilities seriously. Samuel would sit and hold Margaret for hours, reading to her from his school books. Sarah made her dolls out of corn husks and scraps of fabric. James, now 6 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister and appointed himself her guardian. Grace watched her family grow and change and felt a deep contentment she had never thought possible. The scared, desperate woman who had stumbled through a dust storm felt like a different person, someone from another life. That woman had survived, but this woman, Grace Reeves, was thriving. The ranch continued to grow. Owen bought more land and increased the herd. He was known throughout the territory as a fair and honest rancher, and other cattlemen sought his advice. Grace became active in the small Placitas community, helping to organize church socials and teaching the younger children to read. The Reeves family was respected and well-liked, their home always open to neighbors in need. When Samuel was 16, he started talking about wanting to be a rancher like his father. Owen took him on as a full partner, teaching him everything about running the operation. Sarah, at the same age, announced that she wanted to be a teacher. Grace and Owen supported her ambitions, saving money to send her to a teaching college in Santa Fe. James grew into a thoughtful, artistic boy who loved to draw the desert landscape and the animals on the ranch. Margaret was a whirlwind of energy and curiosity, never content to sit still when there was exploring to be done. On the evening of their 15th wedding anniversary, Owen took Grace on a ride to the spot where he had found her all those years ago. The desert was peaceful in the fading light, the air cool and fragrant with sage. They stood together at the place where Grace had fallen to her knees, certain she was going to die. "I think about that day often," Grace said. "How close I came to losing everything. How different my life would have been if you had not come along." "I think about it too," Owen admitted. "I think about all the things that had to happen for us to find each other. The storm, the timing, the fact that I saw you from a distance. If any one of those things had been different, we never would have met." "Do you believe in fate?" Grace asked. Owen was quiet for a moment, considering. "I believe in choices. I chose to ride toward you instead of seeking shelter. You chose to keep going when everything seemed hopeless. We have chosen each other every day since. Maybe that is better than fate. Maybe that is stronger." Grace turned and kissed him there in the desert where her new life had begun. "I choose you, Owen Reeves, today and every day. And I choose you, Grace Reeves, always and forever." They rode back to the ranch as the stars came out, and Grace felt the same sense of peace and rightness that she had felt so many times over the years. This was her life. This was her family, and it was more than she had ever dared to dream. The children grew into adults, each finding their own path. Samuel took over more of the ranch operations as Owen got older, proving himself to be a capable and innovative rancher. He married a girl from Albuquerque, and they built a house on the far side of the property. Sarah went to teaching college and returned to Placitas to teach, just as she had planned. She married a merchant's son and had 3 children of her own. James discovered a talent for breaking and training horses, and word of his skills spread throughout the territory. He traveled for several years, working on different ranches, before coming home and starting his own training operation on a corner of the family land. Margaret, the youngest, proved to be a gifted healer. She apprenticed with Ruth, the midwife who had delivered Samuel and Sarah, and eventually took over Ruth's practice when the older woman retired. Grace and Owen watched their children build their lives with pride and satisfaction. The ranch had grown from a small, struggling operation into a thriving family enterprise. The Reeves name was known and respected throughout New Mexico. When Owen was in his 50s, he started slowing down. The decades of hard physical labor had taken their toll on his body. Grace noticed him moving more carefully, saw the pain in his eyes when he thought no one was looking. She convinced him to let Samuel take over most of the day-to-day operations, and Owen reluctantly agreed. "I am not ready to be an old man," he grumbled one evening as Grace rubbed liniment into his aching shoulders. "You are not old. You are seasoned." Grace kissed the back of his neck. "And you have earned the right to rest a little. You have been working since you were a child. Let Samuel carry the load for a while." Owen sighed but did not argue. He spent his semi-retirement working on smaller projects around the ranch, mentoring his grandchildren, and spending long evenings with Grace on the porch, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Samuel and his wife brought their 4 children. Sarah came with her husband and their 3. James brought his wife and their twin daughters. Margaret came alone, having not yet found the right person to marry, but surrounded by friends from throughout the territory. Grace looked around the crowded house at all the people who existed, because she had refused to give up in that dust storm, because Owen had ridden toward danger instead of away from it. Samuel and Sarah, the twins she had carried in terror and desperation, were now confident adults with families of their own. James and Margaret, born out of the love she and Owen had built, were thriving. And the grandchildren, all 9 of them, were healthy and happy and full of promise. Owen stood and raised his glass. "I want to make a toast," he said, and the room fell silent. 25 years ago, I met a woman who changed my life. She was brave and strong and determined, and she was carrying 2 babies who needed a chance. I told her that she was carrying my future, and I have never spoken truer words. Grace, you gave me a family I never dreamed I could have. You gave me a love I never thought I deserved. You gave me a purpose and a joy that has filled every day of the last quarter century. I love you more now than I did on the day we married, and I will love you until the end of time." Grace stood and kissed him, not caring that the whole family was watching. "And I love you, Owen Reeves. You saved my life and gave me a reason to live. You have been the best husband, the best father, the best man I have ever known. I am so grateful for every day we have had together." The celebration lasted late into the night. The grandchildren played in the yard until they collapsed from exhaustion. The adults sat around the table, telling stories and laughing and drinking coffee. Grace moved among them, soaking in the warmth and love, feeling blessed beyond measure. As the guests began to leave, Samuel pulled his parents aside. "I have something I want to tell you," he said, his face serious. "I have been thinking about this for a while, and I wanted to wait until tonight to say it. I want to rename the ranch. I want to call it the Reeves Family Ranch in honor of what you two have built here. Not just the cattle and the land, but the family, the legacy." Owen looked at Grace, his eyes bright. "What do you think?" "I think it is perfect," Grace said, her voice thick with emotion. "The Reeves Family Ranch, yes," Samuel smiled. "I will have a sign made. We will put it at the front gate." After everyone had left and the house was quiet again, Grace and Owen sat on the porch in their usual spot. The desert night was cool and clear, the stars brilliant overhead. Grace leaned against Owen and he wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "It has been a good life," Owen said softly. "The best life," Grace agreed. "Sometimes I still cannot believe how far we have come. From that day in the dust storm to tonight with all our children and grandchildren around us. It feels like a miracle." "It was not a miracle. It was work and choice and commitment." Owen kissed her temple. "But yes, it feels miraculous anyway." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built something lasting. Grace thought about the woman she had been, desperate and alone, carrying twins and convinced she was going to die. That woman could never have imagined this life, this family, this deep and abiding love. "What are you thinking about?" Owen asked. "About how lucky I am. About how one moment, one choice can change everything. About how grateful I am that you were the kind of man who rode into a storm to help a stranger." Grace looked up at him. "You told me I was carrying your future, but you were carrying mine too. You just did not know it yet." Owen smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes and transformed his weathered face. "I knew it. Maybe not consciously, but somewhere deep down, I knew that you and those babies were going to be the most important thing in my life." "Do you have any regrets?" Grace asked. "Anything you wish you had done differently?" Owen thought for a long moment. "I wish I had told you I loved you sooner. I waited so long, trying to be respectful, trying not to pressure you. But I loved you from almost the beginning, and I should have said so." "I knew," Grace said. "I saw it in everything you did, every kindness, every moment of care. Words are important, but actions matter more. And your actions have always shown me exactly how you feel." "What about you? Any regrets?" Grace shook her head. "Not a single one. Everything I have been through, all the pain and fear and struggle, led me to you. I would not change a moment of it." They sat together until the night grew cold, then went inside to the warmth of their home. In the bedroom, they undressed and climbed into bed, and Grace curled against Owen's side the way she had done for thousands of nights. His arm came around her automatically, holding her close. "I love you," Grace whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Owen replied. "Forever and always." The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges. Owen's health declined slowly but steadily. He developed arthritis that made his hands stiff and painful. His back troubled him constantly. But he remained active, refusing to give in to age. Grace's own health remained good, and she devoted herself to caring for Owen, just as he had cared for her all those years ago. Samuel ran the ranch with skill and dedication, expanding the operation and bringing in new breeding stock. Sarah's children grew and started families of their own, making Grace and Owen great-grandparents. James's horse training business flourished, and he became known as the best in the territory. Margaret's healing practice kept her busy, and she finally married a widowed rancher with 2 young children who needed a mother. The Reeves family ranch became a gathering place for the extended family. There were birthday celebrations and holidays, christenings and weddings. The house that had once seemed barely big enough for one person now regularly held dozens. Grace loved the noise and chaos, loved seeing her family grow and thrive. On a warm summer evening when Owen was 63 and Grace was 60, they took their usual evening walk around the property. Owen moved slowly, leaning on a cane, but he was determined to make the circuit. They stopped at the corral where James was working with a young horse, then walked to the garden where Grace grew vegetables and herbs. "Do you remember the first meal I cooked for you?" Grace asked. "It was terrible. Burnt bacon and eggs that were practically rubber," Owen laughed. "It was the best meal I had ever eaten because you made it, liar." But Grace was smiling. "You were too kind to tell me the truth." "I was too smitten to care." Owen squeezed her hand. "I still am." They walked in silence for a while, enjoying the cool evening air and the familiar landscape. When they reached the spot near the house where Owen had planted an oak tree the year they were married, they stopped. The tree had grown tall and strong, providing shade for a bench that Owen had built underneath it. They sat together, and Grace leaned her head on Owen's shoulder. "This tree has outlived the time you thought it would," she said. The local wisdom had been that oaks struggled in the high desert, but this one had thrived. "Stubborn, just like its planter," Owen replied. "I told it that it was going to grow and it did not dare argue." Grace laughed. "That sounds about right." They sat under the oak tree until the stars came out, talking about nothing and everything, comfortable in the way that only comes from decades of partnership. When the night grew cool, they walked back to the house hand in hand, moving slowly but together. That night, as they lay in bed, Owen said, "If I go first, I want you to know something." "Do not talk like that," Grace protested. "Listen to me." Owen's voice was gentle but firm. "If I go first, I want you to keep living, keep spending time with the children and grandchildren. Keep tending your garden. Keep laughing and loving and finding joy. Do not waste time grieving for me when there is still so much life to live." "Owen, promise me, Grace. Promise me you will keep living fully and completely for as long as you have breath in your body." Grace felt tears slide down her cheeks. "I promise. But only if you promise the same. If I go first, you keep going. You keep being the wonderful father and grandfather you have always been." "I promise," Owen said. He pulled her close, and they held each other in the darkness. Two people who had loved each other through decades of joy and struggle and everything in between. Owen lived another 5 years, dying peacefully in his sleep at the age of 68. Grace woke one morning to find him still and cold beside her, his face peaceful, his suffering finally over. She sat with him for a long time, holding his hand and memorizing his face, saying goodbye to the man who had been her partner, her love, her everything. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people from throughout the territory. Owen had touched so many lives with his quiet kindness and steady integrity. Grace stood beside the grave, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and listened to the preacher speak about a life well lived. After the service, as the guests filtered away, Grace stood alone at the graveside. Samuel approached and put his arm around her shoulders. "Are you all right, Mama?" "I am," Grace said, and she meant it. Her heart was broken, but it was also full. "Your father gave me the most beautiful life. I have you and your siblings, all the grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I have memories that will sustain me for the rest of my days. I will miss him terribly, but I am all right." Samuel held her for a moment, then walked with her back to the house. The family gathered around the table, sharing stories about Owen and laughing through their tears. Grace listened to her children talk about their father, heard the love and respect in every word, and felt proud. She kept her promise to Owen. Grace continued to live fully, tending her garden and spending time with her family. She taught her great-grandchildren to cook and told them stories about the old days. She attended weddings and christenings and birthday parties. She took walks around the ranch and sat under the oak tree Owen had planted, feeling his presence in every leaf and branch. When Grace was 75, she gathered her family around her. Her health was failing, and she knew her time was growing short. Samuel and Sarah sat on either side of her on the bed, holding her hands. James stood at the foot of the bed with his wife. Margaret sat in a chair nearby, her healer's eye assessing Grace's condition and knowing the truth. "I want to tell you something," Grace said, her voice weaker than it had been but still clear. "I want to tell you about the day your father saved my life." "We know the story, Mama," Sarah said gently, "but you do not know all of it." Grace took a breath. "I was convinced I was going to die. I had given up hope. And then I saw your father riding toward me, not away from danger, but toward it. He did not know me. He had no reason to help me. But he did it anyway because that is who he was. He was a man who rode into storms to save strangers." She paused, gathering her strength. "He told me that I was carrying his future, and he was right. But he was my future too. He gave me life and love and a family beyond anything I had ever dreamed. He was the best man I have ever known, and I have been blessed to be his wife." "We know, Mama," Samuel said, his voice thick with tears. "We know how much you loved each other." "I want you to know something else," Grace continued. "I want you to know that family is not just about blood. Samuel and Sarah, you were not born to your father, but he loved you as if you were. And you too gave him as much love in return. That is what family means. It means choosing each other, day after day, year after year. It means showing up and doing the hard work and never giving up on each other." She looked at each of her children in turn. "I am so proud of all of you. You have built good lives and raised wonderful families. You have carried on the legacy that your father and I started, and you have made it even better. I could not ask for more. What should we do, Mama?" Margaret asked, and her voice held a note of helplessness. "How do we let you go?" "You keep living," Grace said. "You keep loving each other. You keep building the ranch and raising your children and finding joy in every day. You make your lives count just like your father and I tried to do. That is how you honor me, not by grieving but by living." Grace died 3 days later, surrounded by her family, her hand held by Samuel on one side and Sarah on the other. Her last words were, "Tell your father I am coming home." The funeral was held under the oak tree Owen had planted all those years ago. The entire family gathered, along with what seemed like half the territory. Grace was laid to rest beside Owen, their graves marked by a single stone that read, "Owen and Grace Reeves." Beloved parents, grandparents, great-grandparents. They built a legacy of love. In the years that followed, the Reeves family ranch continued to thrive. Samuel ran the operation with the same dedication his father had shown, and when he was ready to retire, he passed it on to his oldest son. Sarah's children became teachers and merchants and doctors, spreading throughout New Mexico and beyond. James's horse training program became renowned, and his methods were studied by horsemen across the West. Margaret's children followed her into healing, continuing her work of caring for the community. The family never forgot the story of how it all began. On the anniversary of the day Owen found Grace in the dust storm, the family would gather under the oak tree and tell the story to the youngest generation. They would talk about courage and love, about choices and commitment, about a woman who refused to give up and a man who rode into danger to help a stranger. "Your great-great-grandparents were extraordinary people," Samuel's grandson told his own children one evening as they sat under the oak tree. "They took a desperate situation and turned it into something beautiful. They proved that family is not about blood, it is about love. And they showed us that even in the hardest times, if we choose hope and kindness and courage, we can build something that lasts. The children listened with wide eyes, just as generations before them had listened. And when the story was over, they ran off to play in the yard of the ranch that Grace and Owen had built, their laughter echoing across the desert evening. The oak tree continued to grow, its roots running deep into the New Mexico soil, its branches reaching toward the sky. It stood as a living monument to two people who had found each other against impossible odds and created a legacy that would endure for generations. And if you sat quietly beneath its shade on a warm evening, you could almost hear the voices of Owen and Grace, talking softly to each other, planning their future, promising forever. The Reeves family ranch thrived for over a century, remaining in family hands through depressions and droughts, wars and changes that transformed the West from a frontier into the modern world. But the heart of it remained the same, a commitment to family, to the land, and to the values that Owen and Grace had lived by. Their story became legend in Placitas and throughout New Mexico. Young couples would visit their graves, leaving flowers and saying prayers for lasting love. Pregnant women would sit under the oak tree, hoping for the courage and strength that Grace had shown. Ranchers would study Owen's methods and marvel at how much he had built from so little. But more than the legend, more than the ranch or the tree or the gravestone, Owen and Grace's legacy lived on in the people they had raised and the love they had shown. Every kindness extended, every stranger helped, every act of courage in the face of despair carried forward the spirit of that day in the dust storm when two strangers became each other's salvation. Grace Murphy had stumbled through a desert storm carrying twins and certain she was going to die. Owen Reeves had ridden toward danger when anyone else would have sought shelter. Together, they had built a love that transformed not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone who came after them. And that love continued to ripple outward, long after they were gone, touching lives they would never know, inspiring choices they would never see, proving that one moment of courage and compassion can change everything. The desert wind still blew across New Mexico, bringing dust storms and challenges. But at the Reeves family ranch, under the shade of an oak tree that should never have survived in that harsh climate, there was shelter and love, and the enduring promise that even in the hardest times, hope can prevail. Because a cowboy once told a desperate woman that she was carrying his future, and he had meant it with every fiber of his being. And together, they had built a future more beautiful than either could have imagined on that desperate day when their lives first collided in the dust and wind and unforgiving desert sun.